Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I am Amin Yazdani, Director of Canadian Institute for Safety, Wellness, and Performance, and host for today's webinar. This webinar is co-hosted by the Center for Research on Work Disability Policy, the Canadian Stand Association Group, as well as the Canadian Institute for Safety, Wellness, Performance at Conestoga College's School of Business. Our panelists today will share insurance providers' perspective on the work disability management and the new work disability management system standard. Our panelists for today are Sean Wakely. He is the Manager of Training and Development with Manulife's National Disability Best Practices team. Previous to his role, his current role, he was a disability management consultant for Manulife's Vancouver operation, helping clients understand, implement, and manage their disability program and trends. He has been in the group benefit industry for over 17 years. He holds an MBA in global leadership from the University of Fredericton and has the FLMI and CBS insurance and designations. We also have Dr. Behtin Nourouzikia. He is an occupational therapist and assistant professor at the University of Toronto and holds the inaugural Emily Gelseller Grant Early Career Professional in Workplace Mental Health. Through an occupational lens, he utilizes biopsychosocial approach, and his program is a systematic study of occupations in the area of work disability prevention, return to work, and disability management. This approach is designed to produce results directly applicable to identify and assess risk and to develop interventions for prevention or improving high-risk behaviors in the workplace. Behtin and Sean, thanks for your support, and we all look forward to hear your perspective today. Well, we will begin today's webinar with a short presentation on CSA standard development process. Unfortunately, we could not have the CSA representative today, so I will quickly walk you through very basics of the standard development process through CSA. Then I will provide a high-level overview of the standard, and then we'll go through our panelists, which each will have about 15 minutes to discuss 5 questions that were presented to them, and they will speak to those questions following my presentation. If you have any questions, please use the QA function of the platform to ask your questions, and we'll get to them at the end of this webinar. Well, and now let's kind of talk about a standard development process. I think some of you might be familiar with this process, but basically CSA has a standard development process, and that process is usually supported by in-kind time and commitment from a member of the community and representing different stakeholders. The commercial aspect of the CSA standard also looks into certification, inspection, and testing. The standard was developed through the Standard Development Organization arm of the CSA, and as I said, it is a voluntary member-based kind of approach that they're taking in developing standards. They are 12 areas of focus, as you see here in this slide. They are over 10,000 dedicated members representing different stakeholders, and there are over 1,100 standard technical committees operating at given time at CSA. With respect to the CSA's standard on work disability management system, that falls under the OSH management system standards. As you see in this slide, there are a number of them. And these standards more or so complement each other in different topics. It also, this standard also falls under the workplace wellness, worker wellness kind of a group of standards that again looks into psychological health and safety and first aid training and so on within the CSA standard portfolios. You may be asking how standards are developed. Well, technically, if a member of a community or a group of stakeholders come up with an idea, they will propose that to the CSA, and then they assign it to a committee. Then there will be a notification of the standard development, as well as a notification to recruit members for technical committee. Again, it's open to public, and different stakeholders will have the opportunity to contribute into the development of the standard. The technical committee will be formed, and then what happened is then there will be several meetings, and the draft of this standard will be discussed through these meetings. And then after several meetings, the document will be available for public review. And then will be, again, a period of 60 days. Member of the public will be able to provide their feedback on the draft of this standard. Then it goes through a bunch of process around editorial processes, and also making sure that the public review comments are being addressed. And then it gets through the dissemination phase, which this webinar is part of that dissemination, as well as the maintenance phase, where if there is any changes needed to be implemented, the technical committee will meet to make those changes. But usually every few years, usually 5 years, this standard will be due for update. As I said, is a multi-stakeholder expert volunteer their participation using a consensus-based approach, and then is led by, again, a member of the technical committee. And as I said, is an ongoing systematic review process every 5 years. So if you're interested in engaging or participating in any of the CSA standards, you can actually participate through CSA community, and also through the committees. And if there is a call for a new standard, there will be usually a call for participation. Direct input, you can provide that through the draft of this standard and during a public review stage. And also you can participate in conducting research, support standards, and also through different avenues that CSA has in engaging with academic community. There is also CSA's community of interest with a lot of members that they kind of can interact and participate in the standard development process. So again, that was a quick and short introduction of how standards are developed. For more information, you can contact Lina Lopez at CSA. She was and is the project manager of this standard. So now let's talk about the standard and what the CSA Z1011 is all about. Well, I think you all know that the impact of disability in the economy is so significant. 1 in 5 Canadians have one or more disabilities, and the issues around unemployment and underemployment of people with disabilities is a significant global issue that has an enormous negative impact on our economy. The annual cost of disability alone is estimated to be around $1 to $2 trillion worldwide. This is so significant, and that demonstrates how impactful these disabilities are to our life and to the society as a whole. Add to this the current trend in developed countries and the prevalence of chronic and episodic disabilities that is increasing with the aging of labor force. So what have we done to address this important issue? Have we been able to educate our employers and decision makers within organizations to address this global issue? Well, despite overwhelming amount of guidelines and practices out there, the work disability management is in many organizations is varied, piecemeal, and often not based on organizational-wide approach. Well, you see that there is also lack of strategic alignment to business goals and priorities, and that kind of shows a need for a more systematic approach into incorporating best practices on work disability into management system and day-to-day business operation, because that's how you can make sure that employers are on board and decision makers recognize the significance of this issue. Well, you may be representing different stakeholders when it comes to disability management. While looking at the complex work disability management process, we all acknowledge that employers are concerned about the high level of absenteeism and presenteeism and job turnover. There are also some confusion about the role that employers have in disability management and prevention, given the range of programs out there. On the other hand, you have the laborers and unions that they're concerned about sustainable employment over a life course of workers and the high unemployment level for persons with disabilities that has significant socio-economical impact on society. Well, in addition to these two major stakeholders, we have the public sector that represent we have disability support programs that represent that category. They're acting mainly in silos within varied expectations of workers and employers, and this contributes to the complexity of disability management. Add to this concerns about productivity and competitiveness of the economy and how that would be impacted by lack of coordinated, systematic effort in addressing disability in the workplace. Last but not least, we have service providers that they're concerned with their own roles and lack of coordination across different experts and specialists. So I think one of the points that I was trying to make here is that we have a very complex issue that we need to deal with, and that we really need to make sure that the program we put in place is effective enough in bridging the gaps and making sure that these concerns are addressed. So what this standard is all about? Well, this standard aims to promote proactive approaches towards work disability, highlighting the importance of the organizational strategy to address this issue before the onset of work disability. It may include strategies to accommodate workers in order to prevent unnecessary absence or early and safe return to work when health absence occur. We should be focusing on continuum from primary to secondary to tertiary prevention if you're really looking at an effective strategy for work disability. So this is standard. It specifies the requirements for work disability management that can be used by organizations to systematically manage their activities. And it doesn't matter what type of disability you're looking at, this framework will be looking at providing you with that framework to address all types of disabilities at the organizational level, and is applicable to organizations regardless of size and sector. So the scope, as I said, is to provide that framework for organizations to be able to manage work disability within their organization. So the standard, the draft of this standard went through a kind of a comprehensive public review, and the technical committee members came up with a way to address general public's concern about the different aspects of this standard. And the final document has basically two main sections, the content and the informative annexes. And you see here, formative annexes are just to provide additional guidance of different type of information that organizations may need to be able to effectively implement this standard. With respect to the main component of this standard or key requirements, you will see in this section that the CSCS standard used a PDCA model of management system to allow seamless integration to organizational-wide models to address business challenges. For instance, you will start implementing a management system by kind of ensuring that management demonstrates its commitment to implement the system and provide leadership necessary to ensure the success of the system. Ensure responsibilities are outlined, resources are in place, and basically overall organization policy is communicated and enforced through the organizations, and you also set baseline necessary to measure success and failure, and that's really important, and that where these annexes that I introduced in the previous slide will be really helpful and handy. We acknowledge that organizations might currently have some process in place, so you don't need to start everything from scratch. You may have existing programs in place that may well fit into this requirement. So don't reinvent the wheel. You will be able to use whatever you have available and build upon that and make sure that you are addressing the gaps effectively. So you always start with reviewing what you got. Look into your internal policies, procedures. When your review is complete and gaps identify, and how you identify gaps is just to go through the requirements of the standard to see what you're lacking. That's where you need to set your objectives and targets for a specific time periods. Let's say you now want to plan for 2021 and you want to set your objectives by January, by end of January or by February. It is important to note that you should have a continuous improvement plan in place, and no one expects you to go from 0 to 100 in a single year. So some aspect of the program might take a few years to be fully implemented, and that's kind of completely reasonable, and that's perhaps the approach you'll be taking. And you want to make sure that this is not a one-person job. It has to be coordination, participation, active participation of all stakeholders, and most importantly, workers and worker representatives. So the system is designed to work if all the stakeholders are engaged. So make sure to lay the foundation right before starting the process. When your planning is completed and you have your sets of objectives approved by all relevant internal stakeholders, then you enter into an implementation phase. Keep in mind your priorities may change as organizations may go through unexpected challenges. We have COVID-19 right now, and many organizations are navigating their way through that, and perhaps associated claims, disability claims associated with that. So you want to make sure that you are flexible and you go through the process of making sure that you'll be able to adjust your goals and to address the challenges that you face as you go through different stages within your organizations. So you go through the implementation phase and implement objectives and targets that you set in a planning stage, and then evaluate your work. And that kind of what kind of things you want to do now, and what kind of things you may not be able to do, and what are the lessons learned. So you may be unsuccessful in implementing 20% of your goals and objectives, but that's fine. You're looking to what you learn, what didn't work, and then you kind of look into how you can improve those processes. All of these are important and key for senior management to ensure proper resources are prioritized in a continuous improvement model. So you want to make sure that you document not only your success stories, but your failure stories, because that's how you can actually provide feedback to senior management to perhaps provide additional resources or reallocate some of the resources that you may need. So again, collaborate. You have to get into collaborating with everybody in your organization. And you want to make sure that your evaluation of the system is realistic and accurate. So therefore, you need to work with all the relevant stakeholders using some of the annexes that the standard has to offer, and some of them even talk about the how to make a business case when it comes to justifying the need to implement this program. For this standard, we use several guiding principles. Again, we use biopsychosocial approach for disability management. We kind of try to make sure that this standard is an evidence-informed, data-driven, and the approach that we're recommending for disability management is the same. It has to be evidence-informed, data-driven, and a focus on inclusion and accessibility to promote engagement and belonging. That is something, again, that we try to emphasize on throughout the document. And taking a worker-centered approach when it comes to disability management, a case-by-case approach when it comes to disability management. Again, I emphasized a lot about coordination and collaboration. So we want to make sure that that the audience will really understand that, and the standard highlights that the implementation of work disability management is a joint responsibility between organizations, management, and workers, worker representatives, and other internal and relevant stakeholders. And this standard also promotes accommodation and early return to work that considers the essential duties of workers role within the organization. One might ask where to start in the employment cycle. So, we're going to be hearing about insurance providers' perspective when it comes to work disability management, and throughout the employment life cycle, I think insurance providers have significant role to play here. But looking at disability management, where do you really want to start the process? Is it only accommodation of injured workers, or only when you hire a person with disability? Well, the standard highlights kind of WDM, or work disability management, as a continuum in terms of managing worker health over their time with the organization, from recruitment, hiring, onboarding, through to job continuity and advancement, and even eventual departure from the organization. The standard provides additional guidance on what to look in each phase, and that's, again, I think what is unique about this standard is that it provides you with information that you can look into how you can make that experience, that job experience for workers, kind of better, and making sure that they feel that they're protected. With that introduction, now again, I would like to hear from our panelists as what they think would be the role of insurance providers when it comes to work disability management, and perhaps work disability management system standard. We'll start with Sean. We presented 5 questions to Sean, so he will speak to them. Sean, over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Dr. Yazdani. And thank you, everyone, for being here today to chat about the standard. It's an incredibly important document, and one that I think I certainly was waiting for a long time. Simply because, as Dr. Yazdani had said, in my previous experience, I worked very closely with a number of organizations, big and small, to talk about their disability programs, what's working, what's not. And again, this is from the lens of the insurance provider, but being able to see directly into the organization and understand what their challenges were. So with that, I mean, some of the key challenges that I continuously saw with organizations were a lack of resource and expertise to manage workplace disability, a lack of structure in the program, often a lack of leadership buy-in, top-down alignment with what the goals of the program were or how it should be integrated. And more importantly, there was also a lack of continuous improvement or assessment for the program. So often systems and procedures were put into place, but never monitored and measured to ensure that they were hitting the mark. So as Dr. Yazdani had already said in a number of different ways, is that a workplace disability management program really does need to be an ingrained system, just like compensation, just like safety. And it should always be a part of that bigger organizational strategy. Because if it's working in a silo on its own, it may not find the strategic alignment with the rest of the organization and move in the same direction. And to that point, it should be integrated with the other programs that are similar to it. So things such as health benefits, workers' compensation, and even any wellness departments that happen to exist. With that, there also needs to be cultural alignment with the organization. So I've worked with a number of companies where, despite the fact that they did have disability programs, that they did offer benefits, there was a sentiment that it wasn't okay to be disabled, that you shouldn't be taking time away from work. And that can be everything from gossip to managers making it more difficult for employees to return to work when they need support. And that would even lend itself to bigger picture thinking. So supporting employees before that there's an actual disability. How do we accommodate them? How do we think about jobs differently, or even attract new talent into the organization that maybe wouldn't traditionally fit within the role? And as I said before, the top-down approach, there needs to be commitment. So senior leadership has to be on board with how the program is going to work and the fact that the program is going to be meaningful for the organization, because that in and of itself will start to lend toward adding the resources to manage it. The number of times I've had to work with organizations where disability management was just a side of the desk, something that somebody in HR had done, it does a disservice to the employees. It does a disservice to the goal of the program as it's on its own, because they lack the time, they lack the expertise to make it work the way that it should. And that can also run into a lot of problems when it comes to defining and implementing clear policies and procedures, which are incredibly important. And just to keep that top of mind, the expertise that comes with folks who are dedicated to disability management ensures that the organization stays on side with regulations and legislation, but also best practices, collective bargaining agreements if unions are involved. So ideally, the folks who are involved should be familiar with how these programs work and how they can be integrated with other functions of the organization. And to my other point, the review and monitoring. So the disability management environment continuously changes, and we've been seeing over the years disabilities are becoming more complex. The legislation continues to change. And as well, the fact that people are needing accommodations or job modification, it's not as simple as one day I can work and one day I can't anymore. So the program needs to be measured, it needs to be reviewed so that it too can evolve with the environment. And that will also help keep the company aligned with best practices. And also it will help to answer the question, does our current program continue to deliver on the return on investment that we're expecting? Are we actually doing a service to our employees, or are we too far behind the 8 ball and we need to redesign? Now, when it comes to the role of insurance providers in all of this, insurance providers are going to be a key partner in the functioning, the monitoring, and the ongoing improvement of the disability management program. So we're able to provide the expertise for disability management, which is great because it does take it outside of the organization. So it provides a level of confidentiality, which builds often comfort and trust for both employee and employer. But it also helps to delineate the roles of all stakeholders and even build more coordination between them. So as Dr. Yazani has said, there is a lack of coordination in the system in general. So as an insurance provider, we can be collecting and sharing appropriate information to all of the stakeholders, keeping everybody on the same path and keeping a level of transparency moving through, which would be to the benefit of the organization and the employee. We're also there to assist the employer in fulfilling their duty to the employee regarding accommodation, which can be quite complex. So the insurance providers are there to provide the limitations and restrictions, talk about what a return to work plan can look like, help the employer monitor and implement that program as it goes along. And in the end, that will obviously help an employee return to work sooner, ideally. And that in turn helps the organization to drive productivity, improve culture around return to work, and all of the other secondary effects such as retention, employee attraction, excuse me, and in the end, cost savings, which is ideal. And we can also, as providers, provide great insight into organizational health. So often insurance providers can aggregate and collect a lot of data that the employer wouldn't otherwise have access to. So this can help the organization to make decisions about potential initiatives or even establish the relevance of their work disability management program and other benefits as the environment changes. So we can be a partner in saying, here's what's happening, here's perhaps what we need to think about going forward. So pivot and adapt is required. And of course, as an insurance provider, we can also be a great resource for best practices and current industry trends, and even offer solutions to new and emerging problems and needs as they come up. So we can be truly important in keeping an organization's program current with where the environment goes. So a lot of what I've already suggested does talk about how we can support an organization establishing an organizational-wide disability management program. So we'll work closely with the organization to determine the plan designs that meet the established needs. So who is your workforce? What are the costs that you can incur? Like, what is your budget for benefits? What does the geography of your organization look like? We can really adapt and understand what the different needs are for all of those factors. We can also help the organization to determine its communication and collaboration strategy to ensure that appropriate information is being shared with the right people to drive positive outcomes for the program and for employees. So we can be a partner in making sure that everything is moving forward to help employees return to work and keeping the program on side. And as also I've already highlighted, we can be there to support the monitoring, trending, and the bilateral feedback on performance. So often when an organization enters into a relationship with an insurance provider, it's not just about providing a service and moving on. It's about that continual performance piece for both parties. So what can the insurance provider do better to serve the organization? And what more does the organization need to do to make sure that it's driving its own program in the right direction? And then lastly, leveraging expertise. So insurance providers are often very large organizations with a lot of knowledge and expertise within it. So an organization shouldn't be afraid of tapping into that information as much as they can. We're seeing more across the industries. We have a larger body of information to work from. So we can actually really educate organizations about the current environment so that they can focus more on things such as early intervention, holistic health if the organization is moving in that direction. And we're also gaining a lot of ground in a lot of new arenas. So all of the emerging health trends. A great example is everything moving to virtual health models. So insurance providers are often leading the way in what can be done in those arenas. So we can actually help organizations maneuver around that and implement solutions and resources that they could leverage through other programs. And I think I've talked about this a little bit. What can insurance providers do to support injured workers to ensure a timely and safe return to work? Well, through our disability management, we're there to really provide early intervention. So whether that's stay at work support, accommodations, job modifications, and a big piece of this is that early and strong communication and partnership with the organization and with all of the stakeholders involved. So trying to get ahead of the disability curve. When an employee is struggling in the workplace, get your provider involved, help the employee stay in the workplace and recover while still working. It's really healthy for the employee and it's also very healthy for the organization. We're there, as I said before, to share meaningful functional information that can help all stakeholders to identify those early opportunities when somebody is away from the workplace to return. So whether through job modification, some sort of schedule modification. So we're really there to help employees return to life, but also employers to bring their resources back in and control costs. And as I've already highlighted, insurers often have access to a lot of additional tools and resources, which can support employees' health and recovery, and even close gaps to reduce barriers to treatment. So thinking big with your provider can really answer the question, what more can I as an organization do to improve workplace disability management? So either before disability happens, so being proactive and focus on prevention, or being incredibly active and intervening when disability does occur. So there are lots of opportunities for providers and for organizations to partner together on that. And lastly, looking at what facets of the standard do I find particularly helpful? So again, having worked and consulted with a lot of organizations, the planning section I think is great. So whether an organization is starting to implement a program for the first time, or as Dr. Yazdani had said, they already have a program and they want to take a look at what more could be done, the planning section provides a great overview of, what do I need to know? What do I need to understand before I jump into this process? So it gives the reader an opportunity to really put the puzzle pieces together and then or understand what fits where. What should my program look like? And even for those who have programs that already exist, it can provide a lot of great insight into what else can be done to improve the existing program or how to close potential gaps that may exist. And similarly to that, the implementation tips, they provide a lot of great information around the policy, the program development, and adapting the program over time. So making sure that there is that strategic alignment, that consideration of cultural alignment is all involved in the process. And one of the things that I really can't stress enough is the benchmarking and monitoring. So it's great to have a program, but if you're not making sure that the program is delivering value to the employees, delivering value to the organization, and controlling costs the way that it was intended to, then there's an opportunity to take a look at that, refine the program, focus on that continuous improvement. Everything can always be better. And often, as Dr. Yazdani has said, when you even look at failures, that can help you understand what needs to be done differently or what more needs to be added in to make that failure disappear in the future. And lastly, specifically from an accommodation standpoint and helping employees return, because this is a very difficult thing for employers to do and to navigate, the case studies, excuse me, provide a lot of information around accommodation practices. It gives a nice live example for employers to better understand their role, how to maneuver through that, and in many ways, how to partner with insurance providers in making that happen. So I'll be happy to answer any questions after the next presenter goes through his piece, but thank you very much for your time today, everyone.
Thank you, Sean. That was very insightful and very informative per se, and I really enjoyed listening to your perspective, and I think it's a really important perspective. We have some questions, so we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. Our next presenter is Dr. Noor Zakia, and Dr. Noor Zakia was also and is a member of the technical committee for CSA Z1011. Behti, I'll do it to you.
Good afternoon, good morning. Can everyone hear me just to make sure?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Dr. Yazdani, for inviting me. I think you've heard a lot of great insights and information from Sean. So what I'll try to focus on is tell you a little bit about what I'm seeing as being challenges in the current climate in the workplace, particularly as we're dealing with a once-in-a-generational event such as the COVID-19 pandemic. And from both a healthcare provider, a researcher, and someone who's been intimately involved with different insurance providers, both in the province of Ontario, where I am, and also nationally, I can talk a little bit about that. And then give you some, perhaps some concluding remarks as to what I think is particularly useful from the CSA Z11, 1011 standard. I think, workplaces, employees, and their allies are in a very challenging time right now. We're dealing with an unprecedented change in how work is being done. We've seen that many people have had to change how they've done their regular duties, and others are under a tremendous amount of pressure or stress or other types of perturbations to their health, whether it's physical health or mental health. And this has really challenged how people engage in the workplace. And in addition to all the other issues and challenges that people are dealing outside of work, this has presented a lot of one opportunity for insurance providers and other stakeholders to get engaged in the process of supporting individuals in the workplace, but to really highlight the importance of the Z1011 standard and why it's so desperately needed. I too have been waiting for this standard for a very long time. It really does put Canada at the vanguard of this type of work, the emphasis on prevention, the emphasis on using a biopsychosocial model, the emphasis on examining workplace issues through a collaborative partnership that no longer puts the burden on just the employee or the employer, but rather sees this as a joint collective effort to work together. And this is a really exciting time because it it says essentially to all workplaces, no matter what shapes or size you are, small enterprise, large enterprise, medium enterprise, or an employee that has a union or does not, that this is the opportunity for us to engage in this work together. This is a collaborative opportunity. If you look at, for example, mental health in the workplace, no longer is it good enough for an employer to say, if I don't see anything as being wrong with this particular employee, I'm going to think that everything is fine. No, if there are opportunities for you to just touch base and see how you're doing, and just things that as human beings we would want our colleagues or our employers or employees to do so, I think you take that opportunity. And this standard really does put that reflection into the guidelines. It really does also provide a formula, or basically a framework, for employees, employers, insurance providers, and others to have a place to look at. If I've got this challenging problem, how do I approach this? If I'm a small enterprise and I have 10 people or 5 people, or micro enterprise, and I don't have the resources, what can I do to support this individual that, for example, has had challenges in their personal life, and now I see that there's some things going that are not quite right. How do I deal with those kinds of situations? So again, the standard can provide a way, or at least a map or a wayfinding exercise for you to initiate that conversation. I certainly don't mean to imply that the entire onus and everything you're going to want is in the standard. No, what I'm suggesting is that it is a good starting point. It's a starting point for you to kind of look at and review the expertise that are there. We are clearly hearing from the important contributions that insurance providers have in both supporting employers, employees, and bringing all of this together. And as a healthcare provider, oftentimes I'm asked is, how do I navigate this complex system? How do I engage with my employer when I'm off work? I may feel a little bit intimidated. Is it a safe time to talk to them right now? I don't want to lose my job. Or on the other hand, if I'm provided with an individual to see that's funded through an insurance provider, oftentimes the first touch point, it used to be in person, now online, is, do you work for them? Are you going to spy on me? So the other aspect that I want to bring into this is that we want to deconstruct and demystify the process of how all of these different stakeholders are working together, and that this is a collaborative approach. No longer is anyone trying to get someone, but rather that we want to support employees in the workplace. We want to ensure that they're able to go back in a timely and safe manner. And the way to do that is, just like we heard from this previous speaker and also from Dr. Yazdani, is that we have to really be working in a collaborative manner. And sometimes that requires us to have very specific patient-centered, worker-centered approaches to the situation for one person will be different from the next. And there might be some commonalities, but having the time, the ability, the inclination, and the expertise that's in the standard, and also where insurance providers play a significant role, can be very important to bring that together, so that you can look at this from a case-by-case basis. No two individuals are the same. If I were, for example, an injured worker, I'd want to have that personalized attention and detail given to my circumstances, my return to work journey. And I think you see that reflected in the standard as well. I think I also wanted to just touch base finally on, as an academic doing research with different insurance providers or compensation boards or any other type of party that supports employees when they're off work, or if they're at work and they may potentially go off work. I think from the perspective of the employee, and also from the perspective of a healthcare provider and a researcher, I think we want to make sure that the dialogue and the communication on all sides is open. That might seem fairly intuitive, but believe it or not, many times those doors are shut, or they're just not, there isn't that opportunity to engage with one another. And we always have to keep that dialogue going, so that we know what's going on between one place and another. So if a worker, for example, isn't feeling the best one week, and they haven't been checked on by their case manager or other representative at work, why not have that quick check-in, see how you're doing? Or if the employer isn't at all understanding the complexities of why somebody that has, let's say, a brain injury as a result of a workplace issue and seems perfectly fine to them, and when they look at them, it needs this so much time to be off work or be on a graduated return to work plan, and provide that educational piece. A lot of these little things that I've seen both in the research that we've done and also in clinical practice always come together to provide a complete picture. And if you look at some of the scientific literature around the employee perspective when it comes to touch points or contact points with insurance providers, compensation boards, oftentimes they may be intimidated, they may not know the entire process, or they might say that, you know, they're just one employee going up against a very large organization. How do they deal with that type of situation? It could be quite challenging for them, particularly if this is the first time they're doing it. And that's why allies, for example, in associations or unions can play a very pivotal role. And as we heard, employers and working in collaboration with insurance providers can support that relationship. They can come to the table and provide what's needed to support timely return to work and ensure that the lines of communication are there. And finally, I'll leave because I think this is a very important part in what I do for a lot of injured workers from a healthcare perspective is the role of advocacy. If you see that there's a need, if you see that someone genuinely needs to, for example, have additional time off work or additional supports or whatever the case may be, is to be that advocate for that person in whatever role that you're playing. And from the insurance provider, obviously, that can be a very important and significant, powerful mechanism to supporting individuals and ensuring that they go back to work in a timely manner. So I think the advocacy piece shouldn't be underestimated. It should be used by all the different stakeholders that are available. Finally, I'll just close with the following remarks about what I think are really important with this standard. And I think it's been alluded to, but I just want to be crystal clear that I'm very interested in the annexes that are provided. The reason why I highlight these is that they provide very practical and approachable and instruments and tools that you can immediately look at and apply to what you're doing. So we heard that there were case studies. We heard about implementation tools. There's business case strategies. There's even opportunities to look at relevant legislation wherever you are in the country. So it's not specific to one jurisdiction over another. So I think those are very exciting opportunities. And maybe some of the other issues that we're seeing more so in the workplace around systemic barriers, unconscious bias, anti-oppression strategies, looking at non-binary gender terms, and so forth. All of these are now playing a more significant role as we understand workplaces, and the Z1011 standard does a really good job of serving as a primer for all of these. So I invite you, if you haven't already done so, to look at the annexes in particular, because I think they provide a very approachable way to look at the standard if you're intimidated by a document that's perhaps a little bit longer than what you're used to, or if you want to start off with very practical ways to understanding work disability management from whatever perspective you come to the table. I think that's it for me. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you, Beth-Dean. And I think it was really important to hear your perspective on the issues around advocacy and the collaboration. And I think what we heard from Sean and you, they really complement each other in many ways. Hearing from an insurance provider perspective and the healthcare provider perspective, I think that demonstrates how collaboration between different key stakeholders could result in a more effective process when it comes to disability management. And the standard has that capability and the capacity to bring together all those internal and external stakeholders to work together in achieving the objectives of the organizations when it comes to disability management. We have a couple of questions so far. The first question I think is directed at you, Sean. The question is, do you think insurance providers need to promote the use of this standard? And if yes, is there any benefit in having and providing incentives for organizations?
That's a great question. So I actually think we do have a role in promoting the standard, and I think that's very interesting because before I moved into my current role, the standard had come out and I had been talking to all of my clients about it. Even clients where I felt that they had relatively sophisticated programs, I still said to them, look at this. There are always opportunities to think differently and to see what can go on. Now, in terms of incentivizing that for them, That's a bigger question. So it would be to everyone's benefit. It would obviously be to the provider's benefit if a company had a better program in place, because financially things should work a little bit better. Our partnership would be a little bit stronger and probably a bit more fluid. But whether or not there's an appetite for that in the industry, that's a bit more difficult. However, it doesn't mean that we couldn't potentially support the implementation and the understanding of the standard. Just as an example, in Manulife, we do have wellness consultants, which can actually go beyond just looking at wellness initiatives with one of our partnership organizations. We can actually help organizations better design some programs that they may have in place. So there could be opportunities for providers to not necessarily incentivize, but at least strongly support the implementation of the standard.
Okay, so I mean, the next question is, I guess, the follow-up question around the training. Is there any plans within insurance provider organizations to provide training needed to support organizations in implementing the standard?
So I unfortunately can't answer that because I don't know what every organization is going to do. But as I had said, within Manulife, we have already been using our disability management consultants to promote the standard and starting internal discussions on what that will mean. So engaging our clients, engaging our employers with that to at least bring awareness to it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sean. And I think the standard has been released maybe for a few months now, and I think it takes time for organizations to pick it up and perhaps start thinking about how they can kind of promote it or use it within their framework. The next question, I think, is for you, Behdeen. How healthcare providers can work with insurance providers to support organizations in implementing this standard?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that probably will take an hour to answer, but I'll give you the very short version of it. I think, you know, whatever your background is, whether you're primary care provider or allied health or whatever the case may be, is to understand the situation, understand the case, understand the worker, understand the relationship with the workplace and the other stakeholders that are involved, and really be there to support them in whatever capacity is needed from your perspective as a healthcare provider. I can't emphasize the advocacy piece. Oftentimes, I'm told that, you know what, how important is that? I think it's an incredibly important role as healthcare providers, because you're there to make ultimately a judgment on this individual's functional capacity or medical abilities and so forth, to be able to go back to work if that's the situation, or stay at work, or aspects about prevention. So I would say understand the situation, but certainly advocacy, communication, working in a patient-centered or a worker-centered model, where a biopsychosocial framework where you look at not only through a medical model, but through a biology, psychology, and the social supports that are involved would be very beneficial, and one where the practices of healthcare providers is headed in that direction. And be mindful that this is a multidisciplinary approach, right? So we're talking about healthcare providers working together, but when it comes to supporting individuals in the workplace, you're working with a lot of different key stakeholders that aren't healthcare providers. And sometimes as healthcare providers, we do have that challenge in that we kind of speak our own languages, but we're not very good in communicating outside of our circle. So I think we have to get better at that and understand that, for example, someone in human resources is not going to understand the complexities when we get into the jargons of our field, but they're certainly going to appreciate that we say that somebody needs this much time off work because of this reason, and to communicate that and to advocate why that's important. Hopefully that's helpful to you. If you want a more detailed answer, I'm happy to talk to you offline or outside of this setting.
Thank you, Behdeen. Sean, do you have anything else to add, or any closing statement or comment?
No, I really don't have much to add aside from another thank you for everybody who's attended today and listening to myself and Behdeen talk from our perspectives about the standard. I think, Dr. Yazdani, you said it's only been around for a few months, but again, when it came out, I think that this standard is going to be revolutionary for organizations who, for lack of a better term, are fumbling through the process. And as I said before, the process or the needs continue to evolve, and organizations may or may not be ready to adapt to that. But this provides a clear framework for them to have that honest look or conversation with themselves about what do I need to do for workplace disability management, especially with all of the changing needs.
Perfect. Thank you. Bethine, any closing remarks?
Only to say that I'm very excited about the standard, and I think the people that are on this call probably are too, but hopefully you can spread the word and, you know, see the standard be picked up with a lot of different stakeholders in whatever field they're in, because I think there's a lot of good value in it.
Thank you. And the standard is available through CSA's website. If you are within Conestoga College, we now have subscription that will give you access to the standard free of charge if you're a student or faculty. So that's the added benefit of being at Conestoga College, or being associated with Conestoga College. We have a few other webinars scheduled specific to CSAs at 10-11. CRWP partner will have another webinar on insurance provider perspective. We have a webinar on February 22nd on the role of healthcare and disability management, and on March 22nd on work disability management system, and we're looking at the perspective from labor. Feel free to register for those webinars, and the links are available through our website. The recording of this webinar will be available in our YouTube channel by February 1st. The PowerPoint presentations are available through CRWDP website for those webinars hosted by CRWDP. For webinars that hosted by us, we are working with our IT to get them posted. We're going through some changes done through our website, so thanks for your patience. But if you need the PowerPoint presentations, please let me know, and I will email them to you. At the end, I would like to thank our panelists again for their time, our attendees for their patience and supporting us for this webinar. And also, I would like to thank CSA Group for their support and their engagement throughout all these webinars that they've been hosting about this standard. On behalf of my team at CSWP, I wish you a great day, and hope to see you in our next webinar in about a month on February 22nd. Have a wonderful day.